This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Davis, and welcome to another wonderful program as we approach how we can take better care of ourselves in midlife. On the program today, we're going to be talking about a process for the soul where we can work with non-ordinary states of consciousness. Many of us have forgotten our innate sense of wholeness and soul's directive, which is always pulling us back toward it, whether to reclaim or integrate. We're going to find out what kinds of experiences that you can have in these non-ordinary states and the major life shifts that can happen. On the program today is psychotherapist and holotropic breathwork facilitator Ukiah Marcus. He's been with us here before. We're going to talk about the healing process for the soul. Ukiah, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Doing well, thank you very much. Now, tell us what this is about facilitating the healing of the soul. I always thought that the soul was pretty perfect. It's just that we kind of get away from what it actually is.
Oh, well, that's a great insight because that's exactly the truth. The healing of the soul actually means getting to the soul past the constructed self and allowing the essence of the soul to come through. And when the essence of our soul comes through, we experience life in a cohesive fashion, and we have harmony, peace, and joy.
Now, if we believe that we have a soul, aren't we already whole then?
Aha, that's a tricky question. Sure, we are already whole. The problem is that because of the constructed self, and let me explain what the constructed self is. Let's get into this question about the soul. Okay, so I am going to give you what my studies and practices and experiences have led me to for the past 25 years. So as we come in, if you have a pen and a piece of paper, you can draw this, and it really makes sense. So as we come in, as we're conceived into this world, the Upanishads and Kavarshevism of ancient Indian texts say that we are a contraction of consciousness. And I swear I spent about 10 years trying to understand that. And the Old and New Testament, they say that we are created in God's image. And, one day I was thinking about the soul, and I was thinking about the contraction of consciousness, and I replaced the word consciousness for soul. And so we are a contraction of the all souls. Now, imagine this. Imagine the ocean. The ocean has everything in it, all of the minerals, all of the experiences, all of the nutrients, all of the salt. And a contraction of the ocean would be if I took a ladle and I picked up some water in that ladle and then poured it into a bottle. I'd still have the ocean in that bottle, but only it would just look like water in a bottle. And so what I conceived is that when they're talking about a contraction of consciousness, or they're talking about being created in the image of God, what we are is nothing more than a ladle of the all-soul, of God nature, if you will, poured into these skin-encapsulated bodies. So we have, at the essence, at the foundation of our creation, we have the essence of the entire soul of all within us. All of its good, all of its splendor, all of its creation, it's all within us. And that soul, when we are experiencing that within us, that's when we're feeling whole. What gets in the way, as you stated earlier, is this construction of our self that we identify with. And this construction starts from the time of conception. So you've got that line on the piece of paper that you've labeled soul. Mm-hmm. And then as you bring up those two vertical, horizontal ends to make the point of the triangle, you can label one of them mind and one of them brain. And what we know is that brain and the mind work to influence each other. No one can tell us where the mind is I mean, if you had 100 scientists in a room and you asked the question, where's the mind, you'd get 50 different answers. But we know that they influence each other. So as we're growing up, and as we're experiencing it, and even as we are being created within the womb, with the biology that's going on, we are being influenced by our parents' exterior. We're being influenced by the nutrients that they're taking, or not taking, and we're being influenced by the last trimester of birth. So already, as we're coming in, the epigenetics, genetics, and jumping genes, and all of that stuff that's taking place within us is being formulated into a construction of who we're going to believe that we are. Now, all of that is going to get in the way of the soul's expression. So to answer that question, yes, we're already whole, except the experience of wholeness, that beyond concept, that feeling of connectedness to everything and everyone, is squashed by this identity. I call it constructed self, because people have called it false self, and I think the word false has a pejorative nature to it. It's not like we did anything wrong, it's just the way that we come into the world. So we're already whole, the soul's there, but we don't experience that state of wholeness. And interestingly enough, that state of wholeness is the property of, or the motivation behind, any spiritual practice, any religion, any psychology, any New Age thing, anything. We're all looking for that sense of connectedness beyond our skin to the sense of wholeness and awe that we know that our soul possesses. Mm-hmm. And basically what we developed throughout time, and the earliest I can imagine is with the Greek that I know of, with their dream temples. We've come up with a number of methodologies to allow us to move into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, to access our soul, and to have that state of wonder.
Now, what is it like, these non-ordinary states of consciousness?
Well, another really good question. One of the things that we have to consider is, what is an ordinary state of consciousness? So there was a philosopher, or there is a philosopher, his name's Martin Buber, and he was German, and I think in the 50s, early 60s. He's a philosopher-poet. If you've read him, he's difficult to read because he's a poet. He talked about the I-thou relationship. Now, this is before the psychoanalytic people knew anything about attachment theory. This is before we knew anything about relationship. This is way before any of that. And what he said is, and the Gestalt therapist really took this to heart, he said that the I-thou moment is where change happens. And what he meant by the I-thou moment is when you and I are in connectedness, when there is nothing else that exists in the moment other than what we have created in the present. And that is an altered state of consciousness. Non-ordinary state of consciousness. We banter about that term, altered state of consciousness, and altered means neutered, and that's not what we mean at all. We mean it's a non-ordinary state of consciousness. Because ordinarily, we function in the world with that's an it out there. Mm-hmm. I'm not particularly connected to it. I'm driving down the road and it's a car next to me and it's a person in it, and but they're it. There's no sense of connectedness. And so the essence of an altered state of a non-ordinary state of consciousness, call myself again, is that expanded sense of connectedness to another and to everything that exists. Now, I believe that we go in and out of that all the time. We just don't know it. Mm-hmm. And all of our religious, spiritual technology has been created so that we can get into that state. And when we're in that state, we have, spiritual experience. We have a religious experience. And by being connected to the soul or moving past, it's not even moving past, it's forming a trusting, positive relationship between the soul and the constructed self, we can spend more of our time in that state of sustainable joy that is created when we are feeling whole.
So when people come to work with you, they're trying to get to an authentic self so they can freely express who they are and what they're here to do?
Pretty much. And, basically it comes down to a person being able to tell their own truth to the world and still stay connected without the fear that the world and anything in their world, their environment, other people particularly, are going to run away.
Now, how do we know that we are in pursuit of the wrong thing, even though maybe rationally we believe it's the right thing?
Usually that comes about because there's some kind of negative, harmful consequence to self or others.
I see. Okay. So what's it been like when you've worked with people and they've been able to make this connection that they feel that they have lost for the longest time?
Oh, it's wonderful. They become sparkly. I mean, that's a clinical term, sparkly. That's a joke. They become bubbly. They become effervescent. They become sparkly. They become in their own power. And I think one of the questions that really is here is, how do you get to a non-ordinary state of consciousness that will actually allow you to move through aspects of the constructed self that need to be moved through so that the soul then builds, like, say, a pipeline to this reality. Mm-hmm. And, one of the ways that, as you know from the last conversation we had, one of the ways that was specifically designed for this was holotropic breath work. Mm-hmm. And what I have found over the years of doing holotropic breath work and being a psychotherapist is that when holotropic breath work and those experiences of the healing potential of our soul is combined in a loving, caring relationship, well, the healing is quantum leaping. And when I say healing, I'm talking about the integration of the constructed self so that the essence of the soul can freely flow into this world through the person. And when I talk about integration, a lot of people, it's one of those words that people think we know what it means. I'd like to say exactly what I mean. So the constructed self is composed of things that have happened that in our lives, and even before this birth into this arid environment, things that have happened that haven't made sense, haven't been experienced completely, so they haven't been integrated or mulched into the soil of the mind. So they stand out like, trees in a view or stop signs is the way I look at it. So we look out into the world in the now, right now, immediately, and what we see is a bunch of stop signs from the past. And so integration comes along and allows you to experience the stop sign, and as you experience it, it disintegrates into the earth, and pretty soon you have a clear view, and there's no longer any stop sign in front of your eyes. And when I say experience, what I'm talking about is experiencing on more than just the five senses. I'm talking about experiencing on more than the five, 8 or 9, mm-hmm. if you will. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about the 9 senses, including the mental aspect, which takes it emotional and thinking, on the relational aspect, and on the feeling inside the body, the tightness of muscles and things like that, and then on this ninth one that Dan Siegel has called transpirational, beyond our breath, but that's expanded sense of connectedness, knowing that we are part of a greater whole.
It's just so fascinating to realize that it's at everybody's fingertips, and that, it seems to me suffering can kind of actually start taking care of itself.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is that if somebody has the capability, the capacity in themselves to experience the events of life for what they are, let's say sadness. Well, sadness is sadness. Fear is fear. Joy is joy. Anger is anger. If they experience those, and this is very much in a Buddhist perspective, if they experience those for what they are and allow them to drift through, then, they're integrating as they move on, as they go through life. Most of us don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us get stuck someplace, and some get stuck more than others, and some get stuck earlier than others. And there's many, many people that don't, and again, I don't want this to sound pejorative, because what it is, it's just a manifestation of our society, culture, and the world at large. We don't ever have the relationship with another that is supportive, caring, and loving, where we can be exactly who we are, with all our warts and with all our foibles, and still be loved. And that can start really, really early.
Mm-hmm. When people actually take on this work, how soon do they begin to feel a difference in their lives?
Well, that is, and I'm going to harken back to the holotropic breath work here. As far as I can tell, the holotropic breath work combined with psychotherapy, good psychotherapy, is probably the most productive work it is the most productive work that I have ever seen. People make quantum leaps. Here, I'll give you my own story. And I came from a family that had pretty much a unwritten edict that you had to be a doctor, and you had to be rich, and you had to have Cadillacs and Mercedes and shit like that. And I said to my dad once, I said, I really want to be a psychologist. And he just looked at me and he said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. You'll never make any money like that." And I took it to heart. I was young. In fact, actually, at the age of 9, I said I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and that was okay because at least it was an MD. So I did my damnedest to fulfill that family edict, and I was miserable. And I saw a notice on a board about a holotropic breath workshop, and I didn't know anything about it. And the words that they used were like airy-fairy words of the hippie generation, is what I thought. And there was something that made me need to do that. So I did it. And in that process, I had a death rebirth experience. I, as an individual, needing to be an MD and all that crap, died. And in that same session, I was reborn into a village that honored me, honored my appearance into the village, and just nurtured and loved me. And tears are running down my face, and I'm just, I'm just amazed. Right? So, it ends, and we do the processing, and we do the graphic representation and all of that stuff. And the next day, I felt like I was free. I felt like Charles Dickens leads us to believe that Scrooge feels on Christmas Day when he's out there giving away his money and feeling wonderful about the world and everything. And I was not giving away my money. I didn't have it. I was stupid. And I was just feeling just wonderful. Well, within 3 weeks of that session, I dropped out of the school that I was in, made a decision that I was going to go become a psychotherapist, and in that has brought me such joy in my life I'm doing my soul's work, the work that I knew I wanted to do when I was 9 years old. And what I have seen, and the story that I just told you, this is the most amazing thing. The director of psychiatry at UCLA, Charlie Hobbs, I think his last name's Hobbs, his first name's Charles, like, he will tell you the same story. But he'll use his territory. And the CEO of Whole Foods in a magazine for the New Yorker a few years did an interview, credits holotropic breathwork with him becoming a semi-nice guy and a reasonable businessman. It goes on and on. You can talk to people throughout the world that will tell you the same thing. So I've never found anything that was as sustainable, as quick as that. Now, when we're in session, and it's me and you, and you haven't done holotropic breathwork because you're not ready to yet, and we have forming that I-thou moment, that deep I-thou moment, because it gets deep. It gets really deep, and you can feel the altered or the non-ordinary about it. People comment when they come into my office, they can feel it. When it's deep like that, and there's a few sessions, there is a change, and the change that takes place almost without people knowing it, but they will come in and they will say, they'll present to me, and they'll be powerful again, full of their own power. Yeah, I'm going to quit that job that sucked that I've been miserable about. Or, I really got to do something about this thing that's been standing in the way, and now I can do it.
I think it's funny, too, that a lot of us always stand by idly looking for safety when, in fact, if we could just feel the freedom of letting go and trusting and allowing our intuition to guide us, that we'd find life a lot more rewarding than we're allowing it to be, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And one of the things that in that statement about letting go is we have to come to a place within us, and now I'm going to talk about the mind. We need to come to a place where the mind is able to let go of its job. The mind has a job. And if you talk to any neurologist, the neurologist will tell you that the brain is an organism that has got one function and one function only, to allow us to fight another day, to allow us to survive and fight another day, and to keep our body going. The mind itself has mechanisms set up in it where it is for our safety. So what the mind does is it keeps us afraid of anything that it assumes could cause our destruction. Now, that was a very good gift when we were out there in the jungles of Africa, or even before that. When we were this puny prey, we needed something to outthink our opponents, and so we have this mind that can reason. So that was great. But now, in our society, our safety on a primal level is much, much more relaxed. We're safe most of the time. Mm-hmm. And yet the mind is out there looking for clues to direct our behavior, not to, so we don't get injured. And when we start forming a relationship between this constructed mind, because that's what it is, it's based on construction. It's based on, if you ask the neurologist, he would say the mind is the brain is an anticipatory device based on past experiences for our safety. So that's the construction. Mm-hmm. So if we develop a nice relationship between this gatekeeper, as a brilliant Jungian analyst called it, and our true self or our soul, now we can start saying, oh, mind, you're scared. It's okay. Relax. I got people here that can support me. And, just you go sit on the shelf right now and let me let go and see where this goes. The interesting thing about holotropic breathwork with the minimal amount of research that has been done on that, although you can correlate it with the volumes of research that has been done with in the late 60s, actually the whole of the 60s decade to the early 70s, and to the research that's been going on around the country with psychedelic drugs and therapy, is that one of the things that is found is that the fear levels diminish. And one of the things that one piece of research with holotropic breathwork found is that the fear of death diminishes. And the fear of death is one that is keeping the mind on its toes. So when you start relaxing that, we say that the container or the field of possibility that we can see starts to expand. And it really comes about by this death rebirth process, in a sense. I mean, the construct itself, when any mammal was first conceived, we were conceived in this liquid environment, right? I mean, we're in this womb. And in order for us to get out of the womb, we have to be expelled. And one of the things that happens is we get, contracted upon by the walls of the uterus. And that's like, just imagine being pushed out of this little dinky space. And we actually die to that aquatic environment that we were conceived in, and we're reborn into this arid environment with all of its possibilities. I mean, I can move my hands way out to my side. I can walk. I can talk where I couldn't before. So every psychological death rebirth, to me, represents nothing more than a revisiting of expanding possibilities. Because now I have more room. Mm-hmm. I have more room to hold more possibilities and more things. And that is a wonderful place to be.
Now, is it possible for people to do this healing on their own, or is it better if they have a facilitator like yourself to help guide them through it?
Are you still there?
Yes.
Yeah. You absolutely need a facilitator to guide you through this. Mm-hmm. You need the relationship. So in, let's say, holotropic breathwork, that was a two-pronged question the way I heard it. In holotropic breathwork, you have the facilitators, and there's always more than one, and you have a sacred witness who is holding space, and so we're all holding space for you. And there's a relationship that's implied and is not just implied, but is there, a loving, caring, nurturing relationship. And then in the psychotherapy itself, there has to be this relationship with another. I mean, think about it. The only way that we grow is in relationship. And you may want to argue with me, and others will argue with me, but I'm going to hark back to this. We are conceived in relationship or out of relationship. We develop in relationship. We are born into relationship. And we perish in relationship. So there is nothing more that can facilitate change than a relationship. That's why a lot of times self-help books don't help, because there's no relationship there. Mm-hmm. So it becomes real tricky. I was with Dan Siegel in California, and he had done his first holotropic breathwork experience, and we're walking back to lunch, and I said to him, "Well, so Dan, how's this work?" Because the guy's brilliant, and he's one hell of an author as well, if nobody's ever read anything of his. And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know you, Kai, but it's all got to be in the relationship." he's more brilliant. He's brilliant, So I went, whoa, okay, let me think about that. And so, I took 5 years to think about that. And, he was actually right on. People who have tried to do something like holotropic breathwork, or they take LSD, or, some some drug, and I make a funny face when I say that because that's just the wrong way to do this, that does allow a non-ordinary state of consciousness, there's no relationship to hold them. So they lose what they got because there's no concretization of it. Mm-hmm. In fact, sometimes what happens in holotropic breathwork or even in therapy, okay, so in therapy, somebody will walk out the door and the next time they'll say, well, I told my wife, my mother, my friend, blah, 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 about what just happened in here, and they told me that it was just because, you had a good day or you had a bad day or something like that. Well, that's like writing you off completely. In holotropic breathwork, somebody will tell you, oh, you're crazy. Or, if you took a drug, somebody would say, oh, yeah, that's just the drug. That really didn't happen. To have the other allows you to concretize the experience. And if you say to me, I had a death rebirth experience, or, in that holotropic breathwork state, I felt like I could fly, and I felt a sensation of soaring through space as an eagle. I'm going to go, wow, what was that like? Or, boy, that's neat. Or, eagles are pretty sacred birds. You might check this book to see what they mean and allow you to have your experience, and I'm going to honor it. And so that becomes a state of making the experience concrete, and it's a sense, it makes it noetic. And when I use the word noetic, what I mean, it allows the person then to grasp, or aids the person in grasping that it really happened, and they have a knowing that I couldn't conceptually talk you out of. It's a knowing beyond concept. That's exactly what the word means. So with that knowing beyond concept, when I was born into this caring village, and then 3 weeks later made this humongous life change, in the face of everything, I knew within me, beyond concept, because, my family was not pleased. I knew beyond concept that I had a village standing behind me. And I don't come from the village, I come from the suburbs. And there was, in this reality, there was nobody there. But I knew that my soul was standing behind me. And one of the ways that soul manifests itself, which is really interesting, is it manifests itself archetypally or mythologically. And I actually have come to understand that this mythological and archetypal language is the language of the pre-verbal mind. And when I say pre-verbal mind, it's the language of our soul. And the way that I have come to understand that is because during the last stages of birth, before we're into this arid environment, we go through 4 distinct stages. One, for quite some time, we're floating in this wonderful amniotic fluid, and if it's a good womb, the mom's not using toxins and nobody's getting beat up or anything like that, we're in this state of bliss. And then the fetus grows to a point where the container that he's in, he's outgrowing its container. And ask any mother. They will tell you, they know when that happens. It's at the end of the last trimester, and they are so uncomfortable, the mother. But so is the fetus, because they can barely move. And then comes this expression of violence, if you will. The uterus is contracting, and the fetus doesn't know what's happening, and it's pushing it through this small opening, and it can be bloody and messy, and then the fetus dies, and then is reborn into this arid environment with either a party. Today people are being born, in water and loving music. When I was born, I was pulled out with forceps and slapped on the ass. Mm-hmm. That's not quite a great way to get here. So that's imprinting on ourselves. And, what used to be said, and Groff is the one, Stan Groff is the one who came up with that. What used to be said is, the fetus can't remember that because there's no myelinization in the brain at that point. But now, our scientific technology has gotten so good that we know that the emotional centers of the brain are well developed and are being imprinted by those experiences. And if you want, those experiences, and this is an inference on my part, those experiences, in the way I see things, kind of correlate with the 4 or 5 different temperaments the mammalian scientists say that all mammals have. So here, in a constructed view of the self, here we are already predisposed to a type of temperament, meaning where we go to when shit gets bad. Excuse my language, but when stuff happens in life, where our predilection is. Where do we go? Do we get angry? Do we get sad? Do we get scared? Or do we look at it like in shock? I mean, and it seems in my mind to correlate to those birth experiences. And in deep, rich, non-ordinary states of consciousness, we can as well integrate those into our minds so that they no longer have to color our experience. Now, there's a lot of, that was real controversial, what I just said. And the controversy lies around whether we can actually get rid of them or not. I know in many cases of patients that I have seen, the tolerance, the window of tolerance that we have before we go into one of our temperament states has been expanded so far that it's almost non-existent. So in other words, the person rarely...
Right. I was going to ask you, because we're just about out of time, is there a way people can find out more about your work, a website people can go to?
Yeah. We have a website. It's www.hboregon.org. And we have a workshop coming up, a holotropic breathwork workshop coming up April 11th and 12th.
Okay, and this is for people in the Portland, Oregon area?
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Ukiah, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. It was very in-depth to be able to share with people how they can reconnect and heal the soul. Thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
You betcha.
Bye for now.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can find out more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do have a weekly e-news update for you to encourage you to subscribe to as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.